everybody. We got a great one today, for a change. Anne Applebaum and Franklin Foer, both brilliant journalists for The Atlantic, join me today to talk about what happened around the world in 2025. It didn't actually turn out the way Donald Trump said it would. He said he was going to end the war in Ukraine on day one, and of course, looks like he won't get it done in year one. As we taped the conversation, more was coming out about the oil tanker we seized off of Venezuela. Trump says it's the biggest tanker that's ever been seized. When I first heard about it, I thought, wow, that could transport a lot of cocaine. Well, it wasn't cocaine. It was carrying oil, Venezuelan oil. But it turns out the tanker had a federal judge's order against it because it has a history of illegally carrying Iranian oil, which finances Iranian terrorist activities around the world. Well, we on the Al Franken podcast are steadfastly against Iranian terrorist activities. But subsequent to my discussion with Anne and Frank, the Trump administration announced it had sanctioned 6 more crude oil tankers with Venezuelan oil that will be headed, they say, to China, I guess through the Panama Canal. Oh, I see. This is Trump's plan to drive Venezuela into even deeper poverty and overthrow Maduro. This is about regime change so that Trump and his pals in the oil business can get a piece of that action. I see. I see. Well, closer to home, Indiana, to be specific, 21 Republicans in the state Senate sided with all 10 Democrats to defeat passage of a new gerrymandered map to add 2 more Republican congressional seats. Another grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia refused to indict Letitia James. This is the 3rd attempt to indict the New York Attorney General. The first was successful, kind of, but it was thrown out because a judge determined that Lindsay Halligan, the U.S. attorney who indicted James, wasn't legally the U.S. attorney. Then a second grand jury refused to indict James because presumably the charges just were so weak. And now the 3rd attempt has failed, but they'll try again. Trump will get his retribution, or at least add to James' legal fees. Well, Mike Lindell, the MyPillow guy and election conspiracy nut who spread false accusations that the 2020 presidential election was stolen, is running for governor in my home state of Minnesota. I don't know Lindell, but he made a fortune with MyPillow, a fortune he's evidently lost, in part because many big box stores dropped MyPillow in 2021 after he became a national election denial spokesman. He says he's $10 million in debt after being successfully sued for defamation by Dominion and Smartmatic voting machine companies. He owes millions in legal fees, plus he hosted a Prove Mike Wrong challenge in 2021, offering $5 million to anyone who could prove his election data analysis was false. Well, someone did. I know the people of Minnesota, and that's just the kind of guy they want as chief executive of our state. And the Republicans in the Senate have refused to extend the ACA subsidies, meaning that millions of Americans will see their premiums skyrocket. That's an issue that Democrats will carry into the midterms, an issue I wish we didn't have. But our focus today is on the globe, Anne Applebaum and Franklin Foer, on what happened around the world during Trump's first year back in office. It's a great one, for a change. Yeah, we did this 2 years ago.
The people wanted more.
They want more 2 years later. I want to start by highlighting President Trump's remarkable achievement of ending 8 wars, 6 this year so far, anyway. And he was honored this last week at the Donald Trump Institute of Peace and celebrating the peace that he, I guess, brokered between what is called the Republic of Congo and Rwanda. But the next day, there was new fighting between.
The Nobel Prize is coming.
I guess we're going to kind of do a review of the year. I want to start with something that happened toward the beginning of the year, which is USAID, that Musk is head of Doge. And one of the first things he did was cut USAID aid. And you went to Sudan?
I did.
And saw the results of that.
I did. I mean, I'll preface it by saying it looks like Musk cut USAID on the basis of some weird conspiracy theories that were cooked up by people on the internet. So now we know, anybody who says it doesn't matter what they say on the internet is wrong, because tens and maybe hundreds of thousands of people might die because of cuts to food aid and medical aid that we've done very abruptly. I mean, I think the main thing to understand about USAID is that US didn't contribute all of it, but we did a lot of the logistics. So the shipping of food around the world, the keeping of websites, the collecting of statistics, a lot of USAID, that was a lot of USAID. And when that ended abruptly, remember, it was just like they crashed the websites and they burned the warehouses and they got rid of everything all at once and canceled all the contracts.
This is food. This is medicine.
This is food. This is medicine. This is life-saving stuff. I mean, that's most of what USAID did. There were some things it did that, were arguably, some people in Congress liked them and some didn't. But the really dramatic cuts were to provision of food to refugees and to war zones and to places where there are food shortages.
And medicine.
And also, and medicine, and medicine. And US had this incredible
treatment.
Exactly. A huge program in Africa created by George W. Bush called PEPFAR, which was giving AIDS medication to newborns and mothers and all kinds of people. And it was just ended overnight. I mean, literally, they just didn't send it out anymore. And people died almost immediately, and they've been dying ever since.
I think Harvard School of Health or something said it was 600,000.
I think that's projected over the next few years. That's sounds very plausible to me when you think about what it was. I was in Sudan, and in Sudan, I was there in March, and it was just in April. It was just the beginning of this change. And I have to tell you, the chaos was already evident, and people were already starting to feel that there was things going wrong in the system. The really most awful thing to me, though, was a conversation I had with a doctor there. I've said this before, but it can't be repeated enough. It was a very young doctor, very brave, was working in a pediatric hospital near the front line. This is outside of Khartoum. He started to explain to me that he had been given these special nutritional supplements that the U.S. and others make, but the U.S. gives to malnourished babies and children. And they're made of peanuts, and they're made in Georgia, and they're made in a couple other places. And they are sent by USAID around the world. And they're very efficient because they give you a lot of calories at once, and they're easy to store and various other things. And he still had some of these. He had a hospital with malnourished children in it. So these are very tiny babies that are very thin and dying. And, if you give this food to malnourished children, they recover. And he was explaining to me that he was using these packages, and he wanted me to know, as a representative of the United States, that he wasn't wasting them. In other words, he was giving them to real and I just seen the malnourished children, So here is a guy, who feels he, has to explain that he's not waste. It's not waste, because he had understood Americans are cutting this because of waste. And I have to tell you, for me, it was unbelievably embarrassing. Why should this guy try to justify his use of life-saving food, to me? And I think that's echoed, it's echoing all over the world, not just Africa, all kinds of places where people are genuinely confused. Like, what did we do wrong? And why is this suddenly stopped? And maybe if we explain to the Americans that we're not wasting it, that they'll understand. And the layers of, the damage in terms of human life, but also in terms of America's reputation, I think it's going to go on echoing for years and years.
Can I just? I've been talking to fired civil servants over the course of the last couple months, and talking to people at USAID and at the State Department, and it is these kind of 1,000 points of small generosity and beneficence where you have soft power happening in remote corners of the world, where you have a guy in Indonesia who's able to come up with a program, a nutrition program, where he gets an American Christian NGO and a company to work together with the government to do something where we're not actually making the investment. It's the ability to leverage connections that is responsible for these things that have outsized impact on people's lives, but also on the reputation of the United States. And these people are very aware that in a lot of these countries, the United States is engaged in a competition with China for hearts and minds. But the thing that I've just been so struck by as far as the future of American foreign policy is concerned, it's not just soft power, it's actual diplomacy, that there's no manual for how you conduct American foreign policy. There's no school that you can go to that would appropriately train you from scratch about how to do it. American foreign policy is something where you have people who acquire know-how over decades that becomes the wisdom that is then transmitted to incoming generations of foreign service officers and of people who work at USAID or in the Pentagon. And the layoffs, the reductions in forces and the resignations that have happened over the course of the last year have afflicted the most senior ranks of the United States government. So the places where that wisdom of know-how, that archive of how to do foreign policy is deepest, have been the most eviscerated. And so when it comes to starting things up from scratch, and God willing, there's an administration that's able to rebuild some of this capacity someday, they really will be improvising wildly, because all of the senior heads, all of the people who remember how to do these sorts of things are gone.
Let's move on, I guess, to we're kind of doing the events of the year, and I want to go to Israel and Gaza. Where was war at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of 2025?
At the beginning of 2025, the war was raging. And then a couple weeks into that year, there was a ceasefire that Trump was able to negotiate, even though he wasn't yet president, negotiated through his emissaries, and the Biden administration was willing to kind of cede that diplomatic terrain to the Trumpies because it felt like Trump had some unique ability to persuade Netanyahu to end the war. And there was the sense that Trump just didn't like the optics of the war and therefore would apply pressure on Netanyahu that Biden hadn't been able to apply.
So we got a ceasefire and Israel broke it?
Yeah, well, so I would say the remainder of the war continued to grind on. And to some extent, it actually still continues to grind on, even though we have a more formal ceasefire, a more lasting ceasefire in place, that it's kind of a zombie conflict even to this day. But at that early stage in the war, Israel had set for itself this kind of impossible goal, two goals. One was achievable, which was the release of the hostages, and another goal, which was the end of Hamas.
That hasn't happened.
That hasn't happened. The release of the hostages did happen.
Although had been released before. This was just the last hostages.
The last batch of hostages, right.
Right, and the exchange for like 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. And so where is that? That's a plan that was hatched by Kushner and...
Yeah, so most of the terms of the peace agreement were kind of clear from, years ago. And it was clear probably at the beginning of the conflict what the terms would eventually look like. And so it wasn't so much the artistry of getting to an agreement where Israel would buy in, but it was creating the conditions where Israel felt as if it had achieved enough of its goals that it could stop the war and that there was a sufficient political pressure applied on Hamas through Qatar and Turkey and through Israel's military pressure for them to agree to terms.
Okay, so where are they right now? Where are the Israelis? Where's Hamas?
Right now, Gaza is bifurcated into two separate territories. One where most of the population is, where Hamas is in control, and then the eastern part of Gaza where the Israelis maintain control. Now, the western part of Gaza is an immense pile of rubble, and I think that part of there's two main stories. One is kind of what happens ultimately to that rubble, because a lot of that rubble is filled with ordnance. It is such a massive logistical task to get rid of that rubble. The second is there's this question ultimately of governance, and that is Hamas is willing to make certain concessions in order to hand over power to some sort of transitional government. But that transitional government is also dependent on there being some sort of security force that is not Hamas. And nobody really wants to be part of that security force. None of the Arab countries want to be part of that security force. That's just a massive conceptual problem that has yet to be conquered.
Yeah, and there's also the problem. What's going to happen to the people? I mean, there are people living there. What will they do? What does their future look like? And there was some conversation about moving them. I think the Israelis did negotiate semi-secretly to move them somewhere else. That's probably not going to work. And so it's not just how they're going to be governed. How are they going to live? What kind of economies they're going to be there? Who will rebuild it? I mean, none of these questions have been answered yet.
All of them were part of the 20-point plan, but none of them seem very feasible right now.
Yeah, the Middle East kind of defies optimism. But if for this brief flicker, when Trump went to Jerusalem and then Sharm el-Sheikh, and he had every single Arab country kind of standing with him in support of this peace plan, it felt you had permission for a brief moment to feel as if the region was turning its page and that there was this unusual degree of alignment about what would come next. But it's easy to get people to agree to a set of very vague principles. It's another thing to come up with the substance that would allow those principles to be realized.
No,
There's just not the
I thought it was
will.
fake from the beginning. I mean, I was mystified by the coverage of that peace plan. Mystified by it. That people imagined the Middle East conflict is over for 1,000 years. People were saying things like that. And I never understood what was going to happen to Gaza. I never understood who was going to be the force that would run it. I never understood anything about it. And
it was like Trump taking a victory lap. I was I was as skeptical as you, I think, Anne, and I think that's been borne out. So
I get delusionally optimistic at certain moments when I feel like just to allow myself, but then it collapsed pretty quickly. What's also interesting is how the prize that everybody was tracing was this normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and that was always going to be part of whatever interim solution existed. And that's even more remote now than it was a year ago.
Why is that?
Because the Iranian threat has been temporarily diminished in the region. And there's less incentive for them to that's part of it. Less incentive for them to make a deal with Israel. But the other part is that because of their plying Donald Trump with so many presents and so many gifts and so much investment, they've been able to get a lot of promises of American protection without them having to give up anything in return to the United States.
Well, you've written about the Saudis and the UAE, and that was his first trip abroad. I think he went to the Pope's funeral, and but then were you surprised that he went to the Gulf states?
That's exactly what he did in his first term. Same thing.
Was
skipping everybody. I mean, I looked this up in 2017, and historically, in the last several presidencies, the first president's first trip abroad, I mean, it went something like Canada, Canada, Mexico, Canada, Mexico, Canada. I mean, it was, and then, and it was always to an ally or to somebody of immediate interest. And this was Trump visiting his business partners. Those are the people who invest in his son-in-law's company. Those are the people who have given him the best gifts. That's who he thinks is important to the United States.
Well, he got a plane. He got a
plane. He got investments in his crypto company. Huge investments, and we don't know what else actually, because so much of what goes on in that world is secret or anonymous.
But they also began investing in him pretty massively. It felt like the first Trump term, he was priming the pump in order to get massive investment. And as soon as it became clear that he was going to be the nominee for president,
that he was going to be the nominee the second time.
Yeah,
yep.
massive money in his real estate in the Trump organization in order to develop golf courses in Oman and Trump towers in various Saudi cities.
Right. And so this was their way. And they gave $2 billion to the Saudis, gave it to Kushner's investment company, right?
Right.
So this speaks to corruption. I think you've both written about that. And about Ukraine, and Frank about those Gulf states. What have the Gulf states gotten back in terms of the Trump administration?
I mean, for starters, they got Qatar and Saudi Arabia have gotten assurances from the United States that we will defend them. Saudi Arabia has gotten us to lift sanctions on the new government in Syria because they were scrambling to achieve influence in the new Syrian government, and they were worried about Turkey stepping in and claiming territory and assuming greater regional power through Syria. So we were able to help them cement their place there. We've refrained from criticizing the Saudis for human rights violations. And when MBS visited Washington, Trump seemed to be less apologetic for the Khashoggi assassination murder than MBS was. And so we're willing to defend things about Saudi Arabia that even the Saudis are embarrassed to defend.
MBS ordered the murder of Khashoggi, and Trump repeatedly says that he had nothing to do with it.
Right.
And now, so Syria fell, Assad fell, and tell me about this new guy, Ahmad al-Sharaa, and he was a terrorist, right?
He's one of the most interesting people on the world stage today, which isn't saying he's a good guy or a bad guy, but he's somebody who emerged out of the Al-Qaeda world. I mean, there were lots of different groups there, and is now seeking to establish himself as a statesman who's interested in good investment prospects and wants to talk to the IMF and wants his country to grow. And he's been interviewed about this several times, and he has he's not very eloquent, at least in these kind of formal interviews that have been published. He repeatedly says, there are different stages of your life. And at one stage of my life, I was fighting for independence, and now I'm fighting for prosperity and sovereignty of my country in a different way. Then the question is, does somebody really have a conversion like that? And is that really possible? Or can you make that kind of shift in your politics?
Well, he's the first former terrorist, or considered part of a terrorist group to go to the White House, I would think, right?
Probably. I mean, I'm trying to remember whether the former IRA people ever went to the White House. I mean, because there was an evolution inside the Irish Republican Army at one point, which was of course a much smaller scale international problem, but it was still a real one. And some of them made a kind of conversion and decided to do, in their case, even democratic politics. It was always hard to know how to measure them as well. But presumably he's the first ex-Al-Qaeda person in the White House.
Frank, you and I talked the other day about the hostile takeover that Paramount is trying to take of Warner Brothers, and there's some Saudi money in that.
The three Middle Eastern states that are now backing the Jared Kushner-aligned deal that the Ellison family is mounting to take over Warner Brothers.
And the Trump administration will the FTC and the Justice Department will decide who gets that?
I think it's mostly Donald Trump is going to be the one to decide that. I mean, I think he has rigged this as a competition between two groups vying for his approval. And so the question is who will deliver the most for Donald Trump, and the party that delivers the most for Donald Trump, which apparently includes the transformation of CNN into a more pliant news organization, will be the group that wins.
The Paramount Group has Larry Ellison, who has put $40 billion as a backstop to this deal. Yeah. And he's a good friend of Trump's, and Trump's son-in-law is involved in this deal. So CNN, he hates CNN, and
CNN is likely to be a casualty of this. I mean, CNN was going to be spun off by Warner Brothers into some sort of separate entity, as part of a different deal. I'm not totally sure that he can force this if he wants.
Okay, so CNN may change its editorial slant.
Yeah,
this is exactly, I think, what you, in the Atlantic article before the election, you wrote about corruption, kind of Hungary model.
Yeah, this is exactly how, not just Hungary, Turkey, Russia. I mean, this is how countries that are either failing democracies or are established autocracies, this is how they control the media. You know, a lot of us have in our minds the idea that a censor is a guy in a room, who crosses lines out of newspaper articles with some kind of thick pen. Actually, nowadays, censorship is done through pressure and control of ownership, and the control over media moguls, or the particularly the situation that we have here, where the owners of media companies have other interests and there are other deals they want to do with the government, then the government has leverage over them.
This is autocracy. This is,
I mean, competitive authoritarianism. I mean, it's not the same thing as the system they have in communist China, but it's moving away from the idea of independent media that we've known in the past. I mean, we've been moving away from that for a while, but this is a kind of new stage. What it means is that the president isn't directly in control. He wouldn't be directly in control of CNN, but he has influence over the owner, and the owner sets the parameters of what CNN can and can't do, and then it just becomes a very different kind of news station. That's how it worked in Hungary, and that's how it worked in Turkey, and that's what Putin did in Russia. There's a famous incident at the very beginning of Putin's career when he first became president of Russia, where there was a comedy program that he didn't like. It was actually a puppet show.
Yeah.
Maybe you know the story. And he didn't like his puppet, which was a kind of scrawny, kind of gnome-like character. And he didn't shut the show down, but he put huge pressure on the owner of the television station, threatened him in various ways, threatened him personally. Eventually, the television station was sold. And then the new owner of the television station ended the show. And that's how it works now. It is exactly the same as what Putin did, exactly the same, bringing exactly that method of presidential and political control over television to America.
Right. As Brendan Carr said, we can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way.
With Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah, but that's this is the easier way.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Anne Applebaum and Franklin Foer. Hey, everybody, I'd like to get an update on how Nellie is doing. Now, Nellie is Peter's dog, who's been enjoying our sponsor, Ollie's protein-packed meals. Now, Peter, tell me about Nellie.
Nellie's great. She is about 7 years old, we think. Her backstory is a little cloudy, but we adopted her during COVID.
And how long has Nellie been eating Ollie?
She's been eating it for 3 months. And here's the thing. Ollie bought ads on the show about 3 months ago, and they sent us a package so that she could try it out. And she loved it so much that we actually just became members of Ollie. We just bought our own membership.
I bet. Imagine that happens a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. It was immediate how her behavior changed, her appearance changed. We were just out on her walk. She gets so excited for her walks now. She's a much more active dog.
Wow. What are the meals like?
So what you do is when you sign up for Ollie, you give them some information about your dog. You can give them a photo, but you tell them how old the dog is, how much they weigh, and they sort of cater a menu based on what your dog needs to be eating. And so then they send these packets of things like pork with blueberries and chicken with carrots and really delicious sounding meals if you're a dog.
Well, we're a human. Some of that sounds pretty good.
I haven't been brave enough to try it.
And she's been enjoying all this, and she's on her third month of this.
She's on her third month, Al, and we're going to keep going.
Well, thanks, Peter. Your dog's well-being starts with their food, and that's why Ollie delivers fresh, human-grade food that your dog will love. Head to ollie.com/Franken, tell them all about your dog, and use code Franken to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/Franken and enter code Franken to get 60% off your first box. And we are back with Anne Applebaum and Frank Foer. And you've written about Ukraine and the corruption there in that country, but compared to the corruption in the United States
This
and
is
Russia.
It's a really interesting comparison. So in Ukraine, what you have right now is the Ukrainian state investigating itself. Those are the body called the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, which is staffed by civil servants, paid by the government. And that is the group of people who are right now investigating a kickback system that was running in the energy industry. And it was a very ugly system, especially during the war when there's been enormous attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure and people don't have power and electricity. And so, yes, people are very angry that there was money being stolen from the system.
Amazing during a war that would be.
Well, this is the point. So I've spoken to some of the people who were running that investigation and others around it in Ukraine's anti-corruption movement, and they point out that it's exactly because there's a war, and because they see corruption as a source of weakness in the Ukrainian state that they wanted this investigation to go through. Try to imagine right now the current FBI run by Kash Patel investigating the Trump administration. You can't imagine it. It's the same circumstance. And in our country, our institutions are so degraded that our anti-corruption functions aren't even working. When Trump fired all these inspector generals all across the government, there was barely a reaction. What do inspector generals do? Their job is to be inside the institutions and to look out for malfeasance and waste and corruption and so on. And he just fired them. And there was no public reaction. And instead, what we have is a kind of grand scale corruption. So we've already talked about Trump accepting money or accepting favors, or his family accepting money from leaders of the Middle East, and therefore, which is twisting American foreign policy. And we also now have the specter of Trump's, real estate partner and his son-in-law, who's also a businessman, negotiating with the Russians.
And this is Witkoff and
this is Steve Witkoff
Kushner.
And Jared Kushner, who've been going back and forth to Russia and elsewhere.
And well, let's talk about those negotiations. And they haven't gotten. I mean, this is very one-sided deal. It's been that we supposedly wrote.
And their prime interest seems to be Russian-American business deals. And that they're trying to somehow solve the Ukraine war in some way that will make those deals possible. And the way they're trying to solve it is not beneficial to Ukraine or to Europe or to the United States. So this is now, and this I consider to be really, really corrupt. That the interests of some business people are being held over the interests of America and American allies. And the deal is, it's a complicated deal, and there are different pieces to it. I mean, the two most important things is there's been enormous pressure on Ukraine to give up territory that it controls. This is not occupied by Russia.
The deal that was cut includes What are the Donetsk? Is that
So Donetsk is a big province, and Russia controls part of it, and Ukraine controls part of it. And the Russians want the Ukrainians to just give them the rest of it. And this would include kind of heavily fortified cities and minefields and so on.
And this is supposedly what we wrote.
We wrote it. It looks like, though, the Russians wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of pieces of Russian propaganda that keep appearing in Trump's conversation and statements.
And it seems that Trump has favored Putin.
Of course, he has always.
I think if we're doing year in review, the first thing we remember is Vance and Trump yelling at Zelensky in the White House.
No, which was the first real shock. That was actually the moment when everybody on the planet thought that could happen to my prime minister or my president, and everybody in Europe thought this is a hostile administration. So yes, that was a real game changer, that moment.
And then I remember in August, Putin goes to Alaska, meets with Trump, and he literally rolls out a red carpet.
Literally rolled out a red carpet, which he has not done for anybody else.
And was trying to get him to agree to a ceasefire, and Putin said no.
It seems that, yes, Putin said no. Putin doesn't want a ceasefire. Putin has not given up his goals. His goal is to conquer all of Ukraine, and his other goal, maybe just as important, is to divide America from Europe and to end NATO. So those are Putin's goals. And he hasn't given them up, and he continues to pursue them.
Well, and he's succeeded in a large extent in driving us from the Europeans, especially reading this new national security document that the government has published that outlines its primary strategic objectives in the world. We now consider Europe a hostile force. I wanted to just return to one thing about corruption. It's also that Trump has been wielding foreign policy in order to get corrupt autocrats who he likes off the hook. That he's done this in Israel, where he's pushed for a pardon for Benjamin Netanyahu. He's done this with Brazil, where in order to try to stymie the prosecution of Jair Bolsonaro, he's ratcheted up tariffs in a massive sort of way. And internally, he's undone a lot of the apparatus that we have in the Justice Department, in the government, that aims to limit global corruption. I mean, he's essentially given a green light to the corrupt autocrats around the world to move forward with all of their corrupt endeavors.
This administration, the Trump administration, is by far the most corrupt in our history, right?
And there isn't anybody in second place. There have been other administrations where, somebody helped his brother-in-law get a deal or something. But I mean, there's nothing grand scale like this before, where American foreign policy is corrupted by foreign money. I can't think of an equivalent.
And I don't think we actually know, we're talking about this Ukraine deal. We don't even know the full dimensions of the corruption, right? Some of the seedier parts of it reside in appendices to the deal that haven't been reported on, that aren't available.
Well, there's not going to be a deal, is there? I mean, basically, Zelensky said not giving up any land that they haven't conquered. And
well, there may still be, who knows? But one thing about the land that's also mystifies me is that I'm not sure Zelensky can give an order that will be obeyed. In other words, if he tells the Ukrainian army to retreat and give up territory, I'm not sure they'll do it. So I'm not sure he can do this. I mean, it would be so unpopular. And that's an army that functions in many ways much more like a grassroots, like a revolutionary movement. I mean, it has different controllers, and some of the commanders have their own loyalty and their own sources of funding. And I just don't believe he can give an order that will be followed in that sphere, nor can he do it and stay in office. So it's an incredible thing to ask. I mean, it's an impossible and improbable ask. He's already said he would have a ceasefire on current lines, which is already a concession. He said if there were a ceasefire, he would hold elections, which is also a concession. I don't know why he should have to have elections and not Putin. There hasn't been a free election in Russia for 20 years. He's made a series of compromising, but he's not going to be able to order his army to retreat. It's just not going to happen.
Well, in this national security strategy that Frank was talking about, we're not very keen on the priority of democracy, are we?
No, we don't mention it at all. I mean, the strange thing about the national security strategy is it feels a little bit like, you know how the Bible is written by different people and biblical scholars find different voices in the Bible. And that's kind of what the national security strategy is like too. And there's some parts of it where someone is writing about, oh, well, we need to do X or Y. We need to get Europe and Japan and South Korea on our side to do X or Y. And then there's another part of it where they say, and actually there's some governments in Europe that we don't like because we feel I don't know whether it's gender or immigration or there's something we don't like about them. And so we're going to try and overthrow them. And it's going to be very hard to get countries to work with us and do things with us if we're trying to overthrow their governments and if we're intervening in their democratic process. The other weird thing about it is that it talks about how, okay, we're not going to try and change anybody's government, and not everybody has to be a democracy, and we're going to be realistic and so on. Okay, so the only countries that we're now interested in intervening in and whose political nature we care about are our democratic allies, and we want them to become more authoritarian. That seems to be our policy now.
They're not high on European countries. At one point, they warned that NATO members risk becoming majority non-European,
which is absurd. If you look at the numbers, it's absurd. Even the countries that have the highest number of immigrants. Germany, for example, has a high number of people who are born outside of Germany, but most of them or anyway, a very large percentage of them come from other European countries, like they're Polish, or Italian or Romanian. And so it's a very bizarre argument that I think must come from, again, some ideologue in the State Department, maybe it's Darren Beatty, maybe it's somebody else, who is reading some far-right fever dream material online, and that's where they got it from. It literally bears no resemblance to reality.
You live in Poland some of the time?
I live in Poland about half the time, yeah.
Okay. This is Trump talking about European leaders. He said, some are okay. I know the good leaders. I know the bad leaders. I know the smart ones. I know the stupid ones. You get some real stupid ones too. But they're not doing a good job. Europe is not doing a good job in many ways. They're not doing a good job.
And this is after a year of European leaders doing flattery and doing meetings and doing, saying nice things about Trump. They put a lot of energy into this Trump diplomacy. Some very notably so. And at the end of the day, what matters most is who's around Trump all the time and who's showing him what pieces of information. And he is surrounded by people who are saying, who knows what their pictures they're showing him of Sweden or Stockholm or London or Berlin. He's also, remember earlier this year, he was under the impression that there were some kind of riots in Portland, maybe because he'd been shown old photographs from some years back. We don't know what he's being told about Europe, but what he's doing. Like every day, it becomes more damaging, and every day it becomes harder to imagine a normal transatlantic relationship proceeding in the future.
This is also part of it. The problem of corruption when it arrives via foreign governments is that it becomes impossible to discern why America is acting the way that America is acting, and if it's even acting on behalf of its own citizenry, or if it's acting on behalf of as a proxy power for other governments that are enriching the leader. This is the thing that the founders were most freaked out about as they crafted the Constitution.
Yeah, like you wrote a piece about that Benjamin Franklin, when he was leaving Paris, was given, what was that? He got some kind of snuff box?
It was a very ornate snuff box. It had a portrait of the king surrounded by a bunch of diamonds, but he was obliged to present it before the Congress under the Articles of Confederation. And he wasn't supposed to take it, but they voted and they allowed him to take it. But that snuff box informed much of the discussion that happened as the Constitution was being corrupted, and led to there being some fairly clear-cut language in the Constitution prohibiting the acceptance of gifts from foreign countries.
And Trump, of course, is just completely
yes
negated that. Well, let's talk about Venezuela. we sent the carrier group, well, not the carrier group there, but the Gerald R. Ford, which I guess is the largest aircraft carrier in the world. And we have a fleet of warships there. And we've killed more than 80 people who are suspected traffickers. The one we're talking about, which is the first strike we made, that was a boat with 11 people on it. And these are pretty small boats, right? If you're going to traffic drugs, do you want 11 people in this boat instead of a lot of drugs? I mean,
narco-terrorist, I believe is the term.
Narco-terrorists, yeah. And of course, the second strike on that boat killed the two survivors of the first strike. And Admiral Bradley showed that to members of Congress in closed session. A number of them were very disturbed, wanted the video released to the public. Trump had said he would do that, but now has changed his tune and said that it's up to Hegseth, and Hegseth won't release it, of course, because it's pretty obvious that we murdered those two. A couple days ago, we stopped a tanker. Trump says the biggest oil tanker that's ever been seized. Imagine how much cocaine that can hold, a big oil tanker. So are we going to invade Venezuela, you think? What's going to happen here?
I mean, I kind of go back to the inaugural address, which kind of had this strange reference to taking back the Panama Canal, and that within whatever form of America First foreign policy we have, the idea that you can take that which is closest to you and that's easiest to grab seems like it's somehow informing all of this, or that this is maybe some sort of giant manufactured distraction that they have concocted. But these things become an idea fix for Trump. And this is the thing that's on his brain and that he wants desperately. And I've interviewed Nicolas Maduro in 2006, and Maduro is a terrible guy.
This was when Chavez was
a terrible state, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I met him, and he is a clown in a lot of ways. He believes that he kind of that there are spirits that inhabit him, and that he channels in his speeches. And when I met him and interviewed him, I thought that this guy just is a buffoon. But the thing that struck me in the interview was that he told me, the thing that you don't realize about our country is that at some point, there's going to be a civilizational war where you're going to invade us. That war is the future between our two countries. And when he told me that, I thought, oh, well, this is just further evidence of this guy being an idiot. There's no way in which the United States is ever going to invade Venezuela. Well, turns out.
I mean, Venezuela is a strange situation because on the one hand, as Frank says, I mean, this is a very, very ugly dictatorship. Venezuela, a couple decades ago, was the richest country in South America, and Chavez and then Maduro have turned it into the poorest country in South America, and it produces more refugees than Ukraine and Gaza combined. And that's with no war. That's just with poverty. They've created poverty, and they've created this terrible disaster. There is a legitimate Venezuelan opposition. Actually, as we're speaking, the Nobel Prize has just been awarded in Oslo to the leader of the Venezuelan opposition. They won a legitimate election, at the end of last year. They proved that they won it. They conducted it. They had, they had people inside the polling booths in polling stations who collected data, and they won. There's an alternative government waiting to run Venezuela, and they are the legitimate government. So I have no problem saying that. At the same time, there are a lot of mysteries about this. I don't know what it is: war, military action, drug game. I'm not sure what it is. I mean, one is, they don't actually talk about democracy or about Machado much. I mean, so that doesn't seem to be their motive. It seems to me one of the possible motives might be domestic. Trump needs to have a war so that he can declare an emergency, so he can suspend some more laws. He's created this kind of pseudo battle inside the U.S. against brown-skinned people who are supposedly criminals carrying drugs, and this is a kind of extension.
That's hardly a pseudo battle. I mean, that's.
It's a real. I meant pseudo in the sense that there's not a real enemy. There's a real battle, and they're locking people up and arresting them. It's a fake excuse. And maybe the war is designed to give him some kind of excuse. Maybe it's really about the oil. I mean, there is a lot of oil in Venezuela, and it's a very badly managed, and it's been sanctioned for a long time, and so on. So maybe they have business people in the way that they do in the case of Russia, who are waiting, who are egging the administration on because they want the oil. I mean, that's another that's possible. So this could be another kind of kleptocratic oligarchic war. But the strangest thing about it is just that they have made no attempt to explain it. I mean, why do we have soldiers in Puerto Rico and aircraft carriers around Venezuela? Like, if it's meant to be a wag the dog, jingoistic distraction, like they're not even doing the jingoism. So it's a strange and mystifying moment.
Well, I don't think we're going to invade Venezuela.
I mean, I don't think so either. I mean, the Venezuelans think that there might be some military actions or strikes on the territory of Venezuela as opposed to these ships. And I have talked to several people in the Venezuelan opposition, and they're very ambivalent. I mean, of course, they want Maduro to fall, and if Trump can make him fall, then they're in favor of that. They're also targeting people who may or may not be criminals, and even assuming there's no death sentence for small level drug smugglers normally, and so that's making them uncomfortable. And of course, they're nervous about how Trump might go about this and what they'll do, and whether even this would result in a positive change for Venezuela. So it's a very complicated moment for them as well. They would like Trump to put pressure on the Venezuelan administration, but of course they can also imagine all the many ways in which this might go wrong.
I think also, I mean, just to tie it back to some of the foreign policy stuff we've been talking about earlier, there was this period where people were taunting Trump and saying that he always chickens out, taco.
Mm-hmm.
He did strike Iranian nuclear facilities. I think that there's the sense that he's all bluster as when it comes to applying American force, I think is not correct.
Yeah, we hit Iran and we bombed their three of their nuclear facilities, and we said we obliterated them. That wasn't the intelligence actually, but we probably did a lot of damage. I have a question. If we had just stayed on the JCPOA, if we had stayed on that, would we be in a better place with Iran's nuclear program?
Possibly probably as it relates to the nuclear program, there were limits to that deal. It was set to expire at a certain point, I'm sure, but we would have had greater insight to what they were doing.
More monitoring. That was the deal.
Yeah. I think that the thing that's changed the most over the course of the last year is that Iran as a regional power has been neutered. And that's not really the strikes themselves. It has more to do with the way in which Hezbollah has been set back and the way that Hamas has been set back. Mm-hmm. The ring of fire that they had intended to construct around Israel has been not quite extinguished, but a lot of it's been snuffed out.
But by the Israelis, not by
Trump.
The
Israelis, yeah.
The tariffs this was, I guess, Liberation Day was April 2nd, and how have they played internationally, and what has that done to our economy? And
the strange thing about the tariffs is they seem to be very whimsical and very unpredictable, and Trump has almost used them as a kind of blackmail bargaining mechanism, to get stuff for himself, or to get stuff for some companies. There was an ugly scene a few weeks ago in the Oval Office when a Swiss delegation came to negotiate tariffs, and some of the business people brought him presents, and one of the presents was a gold bar. That's a pretty crass present, worth $130,000 or something. And so the tariffs have looked to the outside world like another game to enhance Trump's greed or power, and they don't seem very consistent. It's hard to see the consistency even as how they apply to the U.S. economy. I mean, are they supposed to bring back American manufacturing? In which case they're not doing that because, switching and changing them all the time certainly doesn't create a business environment that will make people want to invest. Are they supposed to just punish countries we don't like? Because that's very sort of irregular too. And, there were tariffs on Ukraine, but not Russia.
There were tariffs on Brazil because they wanted
Exactly.
Bolsonaro.
So the tariffs seem to have a political purpose that, so there, it's a very muddled, very hard to understand policy.
It's also one of the primary justifications for the tariffs was trying to contain China. But if you look at where China sits a year into the Trump administration, arguably Xi is in a much stronger position he was than when Trump came into office, that there had been an effort to regionally contain China. But you take a country like India, which I think had been pulling much closer to the American sphere, much pulling away from China over the course of the last couple of years. Because of tariffs, they've swung hard in China's direction. Or you look even at the sale of chips to China, that the president just approved the sale of NVIDIA chips to China, which it's not even clear that China wants all of these chips. But if the whole national security rationale for containing China that had driven our policy, it's just not a primary part of this whole national security strategy. It seems to be receding. It's even receding as far as tariff policy is concerned.
And we talked about this. You call this the most corrupt administration, and you talk about it in terms of the dealing, like Witkoff and Kushner, basically seemingly doing business deals with the Russians they were negotiating with. And Frank, you talked about it in terms of the Gulf states, and we've talked about this being an autocracy. What do you see coming up? Is this? He's got 3 more years left. Are we going to recover from this? That's a philosophical question. I'm sorry.
Well, it's also a political question. And I think that it's weird watching Democrats because they've swung from fatalism, I think, about their political prospects, and then they have a good election day in the off-year elections, and then they swing in the other direction where you start to see triumphalism begin to kick in the sense that it's inevitable that they're going to clean up in the midterm elections. But I think the question of whether the Democrats are able to present some sort of viable alternative, or whether the American
it's a long way till the midterms.
Or Trump actually pays a price for absurd things like imposing a tariff policy that he needs to then correct for with $12 billion in aid to American farmers. That would seem like ripe political conditions for him paying a severe price for his corrupt policies.
Well, he did that in the first term too. He bailed out and rightly so. I mean, these farmers have been really badly hurt.
I think about is just the way in which the state was destroyed, kind of willy-nilly in such a short period of time, where we lost so much competence, and the whole ethos of the government, which was based on ideas about disinterestedness and neutrality, have all just been kicked in the stomach over the course of this administration. And then it seems like we're going to have this Supreme Court ruling in the Humphreys executor case, where the court's going to overturn the independence of our regulatory agencies, which sets up the prospect that massive decisions about the future of our media or the future of competitive capitalism are no longer settled in the idea of neutrally applying the law. Those questions then just become a matter of the executive imposing themselves on the country, which becomes an avenue for further corruption, for further consolidation of power, for further arbitrary punishment of enemies.
So that is just a rush to autocracy.
Yeah.
Look, Congress can stop Trump. A Congress that decided it will not accept this level of kleptocracy, that will not accept violations of the law, that will not allow the president to destroy congressionally approved programs and institutions, could stop Trump. So it is not as if nothing can possibly be done. It could be done. And this kind of aura of invincibility that Trump had at the beginning is already crumbling. And people are beginning to pay a price in some cases for having gone along with him. And people who care about this stuff and who are bothered about it should focus very, very hard on the midterms, because those will be determined. They can make a big difference into what, maybe not the coming year, but certainly what the final 2 years of this Trump administration looks like. And I think it's maybe worth ending with the thought that Trump and his people will try to cheat. They're already trying to cheat. They're trying to use redistricting. I'm talking about the midterm elections. Mm-hmm. There are other things going on. They are demanding from states, some states, access to their voter rolls, which is unprecedented. They're looking at changing ID requirements for voting, which they're trying to do at a national level. I mean, there are all kinds of small ways in which the administration is trying to shape these midterms, and it will be really, really important for ordinary citizens, politicians, journalists, everybody who cares, to pay attention to this stuff and call it out over the next year, because that, I think, is going to be a big theme.
And this is what other countries have done to move to this kind of autocracy.
One of the reasons, Trump, there are a lot of secrets about what Trump has done, and he doesn't want us to know, for example, what are his deals with Russia and what are his deals with the Gulf states. And he knows that a different Congress would expose those things. And so he and many people around him have a lot of interest in making sure that elections aren't fair. I think that's the theme for the next 9 months.
Okay, and thank you. And Frank, great as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.